So let's bring in our first panel now, One Nation Chief of Staff James Aspey and former Labor councillor Linda Scott. Welcome to you both. Let's get into that US election. I mean, it's impossible to ignore. Let's have a look at Bill Maher, who I reckon made a pretty blunt point about why celebrities couldn't get it done for Kamala Harris.
And it just made me think, I'm sure every single member of the Saturday Night Live cast was a Harris supporter. But what if one of them wasn't? What if one of those cast members was for Trump? Would they have felt comfortable saying so? I really don't think so. They would have had to keep it to themselves. That's not a good place for us to be. You're brats. You're brats and you're snobs, and people don't like that.
James, let's start with you. What do you put Trump's victory down to? I mean, we learned today that he has swept every one of those swing states.
Yeah, what I found remarkable about Trump, I think people are always better their second time around, particularly after he's lost. I saw a different Trump at the end of this campaign. When he came out and did his victory speech, he was more about everybody else who was standing on that stage than himself. And I thought that really told me we're in for a different 4 years in this electoral term once he takes office. But, you know, it goes to the heart of the fact that you can have all the celebrity endorsements you like, Albanese or Kamala Harris, it doesn't work. People saw through it. And it doesn't matter whether you've got Taylor Swift or you've got some of the, Cannon Brooks or whoever on your side here in Australia. It doesn't work. If you're woke, you go broke. And that's exactly the path that this Labor government has put not only the country on, a trajectory of going broke, but every household that lives within this country is feeling the pinch under this government. So they've got some major changes ahead of them if they're going to remain in the game. I know you said that Peter Dutton is, not the most liked guy. I tell you what, if people had the chance to meet Peter Dutton personally, you'd really like the guy. And I back him 100% as being our next Prime Minister, and I'm not even within his party. I just know the man and his character, not, as close as some others, but I think he would be perfect for this country. And he's not all show. He doesn't need, celebrity endorsements to get elected. What he's got is a plan for this country like One Nation does, and we as a party would be very happy to see him elected in the next 6 months, especially if we've got control of the Senate again.
Linda, I tend to agree with James' assessment of Peter Dutton. I mean, I've met him, I've interviewed him in his own electorate for television, and he's a different personality when you meet him. But I mean, I think, Linda, I've spent too much time in Victoria. I mean, Peter's got the same problem that Tony Abbott had in Victoria. It's a very left-leaning state, Victoria, the most left-leaning in the country, and it's going to be difficult for Peter Dutton. I mean, he can win it without winning seats in Victoria, I guess, but they really do need some of those seats. What do you make of Peter Dutton's, comparison to Donald Trump and the people trying to paint him as a Trump light?
Well, look, I too have worked with Peter Dutton as the head of the Local Government Association here in Australia. We worked with him. We worked right across the parliament to advocate for local governments. But I do think that having come out of his last portfolio as Health Minister, trying to introduce a co-payment for Medicare, and now his major policy announcement being about the introduction of nuclear power, as you say, in places like Victoria, which I know you know so well, and other parts of Australia, that is going to go down really badly, and Australians will look at that as a Trump-aligned agenda. And we know from a polling coming out recently that Australians are concerned about that Trump-like really extreme right agenda coming and being imported into Australia by people who are very, very conservative.
James, you've just fought a campaign in Keppel, and you did very well. Congratulations on your effort. Pity you didn't win, but we're talking here about what might make up the issues in the next election campaign. And you've got to look no further, do you, than the US. I mean, it's the same things. It's cost of living, it's immigration, it's energy. They're exactly the same issues. When you were door knocking in that seat, what was the biggest issue that came up for you?
Well, in this area, and I think across most of regional Queensland, and I would encourage Peter Dutton to have a look at this, is our health. predicament across regional parts. It's too long a waiting list for you to get any elective surgery done, but the cost of living is certainly biting most households. And the biggest concern there comes down to the cost of electricity. So if Linda and her cohorts within Labor think the answer is renewables, well, we've already seen that the cost of implementing these and the swaths of prime agricultural land that have got to be covered in wind turbines or these solar arrays, they're just destroying regional communities. It's not happening in your city. You don't want them. And you're allowed to say you don't want them. But for us here in regional parts, we've been told you're getting them whether you like it or not. And people have had a gutful of that. They're all for rooftop solar on their houses. It'll bring down the cost and so forth. But to actually rely on a baseload power grid that will stay alive for industry and keeping the lights on at home and keeping it at a cost that we can all afford, Peter Dutton has tapped into the right chord there. And he's saying to people, well, let's have this discussion about nuclear. I'm willing to nominate the places where I'm prepared to put them. Now it's up to you as a community to say whether you agree with it or not, because the path we're going down with renewables just will not work. And it might power the cities and some of the communities for a third of the year, but what about the other 2/3 of the year? You've got to have baseload power, consistent, and if we want to maintain the industry that we've got in this country for the long haul and develop new industries, power is everything, and it adds to the cost of living. So if we go down those two paths, fix our health system and make sure that power is stable and reliable and cheap in this country, you will fix a lot that's going on in Australia right now.
Linda, I'm going to give you a job you might want or not want. You've just been promoted to senior advisor to Anthony Albanese. You're going to have an election sometime in March. You're the one who's going to get us over the line. What are you telling him about some of the things James just talked about? I mean, forget health for a moment because that's largely a state issue. But on energy, are you telling Anthony Albanese to continue to say nuclear's too expensive, it won't work, and we're not going to do it? Or does he have to soften that message?
Well, look, the Prime Minister doesn't need my advice. He's already telling Australians the truth, which is he's already telling Australians the truth, which is that the land that will be taken up by renewable energy projects in Australia across the nation is about 4%. It is correct that we need to work hard to get those planning provisions in place so that local people can see the contribution benefits that these projects are leaving in a community, and that is a very tangible benefit. And I certainly fought for that, as I know our local governments across Australia, particularly those in regional areas experiencing this energy transition. But the lie that nuclear power is going to have an immediate impact on people's household energy bills, Australians know that is a lie. They know that there is no solution. Yeah,
but your solution is offshore wind turbines, and they're dearer than nuclear.
And here's what else they know, James. They know that in those communities that have been named as places that may be, under a Dutton federal government, the subject of having a nuclear power plant, they were not consulted. Peter Dutton made those announcements. He had not consulted the mayors of those communities. He had not consulted those communities. So this coming federal election will be a referendum, particularly in those communities, about whether they want nuclear power in their backyard or not.
James,
and that will be a really important test.
James, 4%.
One of those communities is where family of mine live, and they're happy with it. So, no, 4% is just bull dust.
Where does that figure come from?
This is. Yeah, Labor's just passed through the lower house of the. She's just. Labor's just passed misinformation and disinformation in the lower house, and they're expecting to get it through the Senate. Linda would not be able to back up 4% as a fact. And that's just disinformation. That is deliberate lies that you're telling the people. No. Talk about no consultation. In my community here, we've got a town just to the west of me here called Bouldercombe that has not been consulted on one of the largest battery installations. The town is up in arms over it. They don't want it. They've already got one that's already caught on fire. Now they want to install one which is 3 times the size. No consultation. They're not even interested in listening to this community. And we don't want to see the wind turbines that go beyond Clark Creek. We had no consultation on those. There's prime agricultural land that's been destroyed as we speak with with solar installations. So again, no consultation, and we're running an extra 10,000 to 30,000 kilometres of additional high transmission power lines to get this power back in to where people live. I'm sorry. Where's the consultation? Because the cost attached to this is off its head.
Well, Linda, I mean, I'll let you respond, but I mean, there's an issue in Victoria as well, where they're going to run this massive transmission line out of the southern parts of New South Wales all the way through prime agricultural land in Victoria to just north of Ballarat. The farmers along that route are saying, "You're not going to put it through my property. I'm not going to take it." And the Victorian government's passed legislation and said, well, bad luck. If you won't agree, we're going to do it anyway. I mean, I know these seats are largely held by the Nationals or the Liberal Party, and Labor are never going to win them anyway. But that sort of discontent within the regional and rural Australia, Anthony Albanese and his ministers have to be very careful not to let that take hold, surely.
Look, there's no doubt that these projects are complex and they're difficult, but nuclear power is decades into the future and more complex and more expensive and will cost households more money for their energy bills. So renewables are the cheapest form of energy. And let's be clear, there's no argument that that building process for renewable energy, again, is challenging, but it will only take up 4% of Australia's landmass. And there's got to be a planning scheme in place that allows for contributions so that communities can see the benefit.
Yeah, well,
let me give you a practical example. The former mayor in New South Wales of Parkes, Ken Keith, converted his property into a solar farm. He had sheep grazing underneath the solar farm with enough space between them to allow enough sunlight to grow enough crop for grazing. It was a great multiple land use, very profitable for its owner, and it was enabled renewable energy to come into that part of New South Wales, enabled him to keep sheep grazing on the land. There's all sorts of solutions that our brilliant Australian farmers have put in place to facilitate cheaper, greener energy right across Australia. Our farmers know what they're doing. They're not silly, and I don't want to have them criticise them on a show like this, where we know they're creating great innovative solutions to these kinds of challenges.
How would you like a 20-storey wind turbine next door to your house?
We've got all sorts of wind turbines going offshore in Newcastle,
next to your house I'm talking about.
Well, I don't live next to the ocean. I can't afford to do that, Steve, unfortunately.
Yeah, but these people are...
And I don't live next to a paddock. I live in a tiny little inner city terrace. So
we could debate this all night.